It's mostly going to be directed at me for my teaching class. But for question number 1, conventional. Any other answers? Is conventional. We're going to spend quite a bit of time talking about Kohlberg's model today and kind of his theory of moral dilemma. He really partnered it with Piaget's model, but looked at how children develop their own moral theories. Number 2, by the time of life, students are generally able to use flexible, abstract thinking, but may be inconsistent in their application of logical reasoning. In childhood, adolescence. And if you think about kind of like impulsivity that comes with adolescence, by the time children reach the age of 6, they will have a vocabulary of about, Although there are a few clear areas where Vygotsky and Piaget differed in their conceptualization of cognitive development, one of the most important was in the areas in the role of culture. School-based professionals need to be familiar with and skilled in the use of developmentally appropriate approaches that match the students' emotional and cognitive levels. Alright, if y'all just pass those forward, or pass them to the side and I'll come down with any questions. Some of the learning objectives from the chapter, it's more about child and adolescent development, their social emotional needs and moral development, their resilience, risk factors, and also taking the context of homeschool and community as part of services and support. So, surprise, surprise, like we can't stop children and adolescents from having negative experiences, but what we can do is provide support during those negative events. Especially having preventative interventions where before there's ever a traumatic event that we know will inevitably happen, we've already given them and helped them develop skills so that they can handle stress and build up resiliency early on. So there's preventative interventions, and then there's, interventions that happen along the way as you recognize that kids need support. Because would anyone in this room say, like, everything in your life has gone 100% perfect? I think so. If we know it's going to happen, if we know children and adolescents are going to experience some very similar negative events, putting in those preventative interventions can really be helpful in the long run for kids. And so that's also kind of how a counselor can work in connecting with administrators, parents, teachers, and students. That especially in some cases, the school is the biggest community support for an area. Now, for different families, that may be different things. For some families, their church may be the center, and they go to their church for support services first. But in a lot of cases, families go to the school and say, hey, we need help. So it can depend on the values of the family, but in a lot of cases, aid does go to the school counselor or even goes to the teacher of I don't know what to do with my kid. We see this behavior at home too. I need help. So considering how the counselor or the teacher or administrator connects all these pieces together is really important for kids. And that also you don't want to have a duplication of services either. You want to provide evidence-based support, but you also want to make sure that we're not all doing the same thing, or we're all kind of doing a little piece and not running effectively. So it is a different aspect of working with children and adolescents that you don't see in regular-based counseling. Again, when we talk about later on, moral development, the cognitive development, is to sit with the child for a 15-minute session which is the standard counseling hour, is a 50-minute session, would be really difficult. I heard a long time ago when I was more working in a school that a child's attention span is pretty much equal to their age. And I do think that's kind of a good go-between. Like, a 5-year-old will probably talk to you for 5 minutes, and you can hold their attention for 5 minutes. 6-year-old, 6 minutes. And so there needs to be something else besides just the traditional counseling of let's go and talk now. For there also to be change, I do think the session has to last longer than 5 minutes. And that's where a lot of times it takes creative interventions and working on their cognitive level and their emotional level to design interventions. And really looking at that, I say like usually a 20 to 30 minute session for a child is a really good input. Maybe even like 15 minutes if you're doing an individual one-on-one with a kindergartner, because you don't want to give them too much information that they can't process. You really want to be on their level. I'm going to play this short video by a counselor about just her techniques of working with kids.
So in a first session with a child, I'd be looking at their age and their development, and can they sit and talk to me for a long period of time? Are they only going to make it a half an hour? But again, ahead of time, I've spoken with the parents. I have a good understanding of the situation and who the child is. I'll ask questions like, what are their strengths and weaknesses? What are they comfortable with? How long can they sit down and talk? So I have kind of a general sense of, can I sit down for an hour with them? Will they only make it 20 minutes? Do they need to be really active and engaged? Do they love talking? Are they really shy and bashful? That said, I usually try to have 2 or 3 things planned ahead of time that I could sit down and do with them. So I'm initially meeting with a child. There's lots I don't know about them. I want to understand how they see the world, how they see their family and their situation. So a couple of things I might do is I have several get-to-know-you games. There's the Ungame for kids. There's little card games where you can sit and ask each other questions, and then I have to answer the question for the child and they answer it. And it just opens up dialogue. It's non-threatening, it's more comfortable. So even just sitting down and playing a game with a child, I could have in my mind 3 or 4 questions, 3 or 4 things I want to know about the child that I'm just casually going to bring up. But I'm doing it in a way that's less threatening. Some kids could just be sitting down and coloring with them. I have a lot of expressive activities I'll do with a child that on their end will seem fun and enjoyable, and on my end I know have a purpose. They're forming information for me. I'm collecting data and getting to know how the child sees their world better. So I might sit down and have them color in a picture and ask these questions, or we might play a casual get-to-know-you game, or I might have an activity that's more structured where I'm asking them to tell me the emotions they feel on a regular basis and what color would you color them. So I would say in general, always have 2 or 3 different things prepared, because you might sit down with a child and they really hate to color, and you find out they really enjoy just sitting and talking to you. So you kind of throw that aside and say, okay, let's talk. Or they're really resistant, or they're really, really shy or intimidated by you. And I'll say, you know what, let's play a game. And we'll pull out a game and play that game. In the back of my mind, I have a desire of what I want to understand and know about them.
So some of the points she made, I absolutely agree with about like taking into account the age and getting into the child having 2 or 3 items, because I've worked with kids who do not color whatsoever. I would start really basic with a lot of kids and like do an about me poster and just get to know them on the level, like who's in their house, like who do they go home to after school, what do they enjoy doing, because then it also helps us to develop those positive reinforcements that are geared towards them. We know in developing goals for children, adolescents, adults, that client-centered goals are more effective than goals that the therapist or the teacher gives to a child or to any client. So my agency required that like every goal be in the child's language, like, and it be word for word a direct quote of something that they wanted to prove. Now sometimes I had to like coach my kids on what, because I don't know what I want to work on. I'm being made to work with you. And then like, what do you usually get in trouble for? And also goals aren't negative, and you try not to have negative goals, because you want to focus on the positive. What can they do? What would success look like, instead of focusing on what you shouldn't be doing. So what would it look like if you weren't in trouble? Well, I'd be sitting in my seat all the time, or I'd have 3 green days instead of all red days, because I don't want a red day. Well, let's set a measurable goal that we're going to try for 3 green days a week, and that's something that we can measure, and it's something that they ask for. But you develop goals through like getting to know and building the relationship with the student. And I would say even in a classroom setting, working towards that, developing relationships with teachers. I know for me, working as a behavioral interventionist in school, that part of my job was restoring relationships between the clients that I worked with and their teachers, because it didn't matter how successful we were in our individual counseling. If they were still having issues with that teacher and we hadn't restored that relationship, then it wasn't going to work. And I actually saw a speaker last semester that he said, as far as goals and relationship goes, because every goal usually involves a relationship with somebody else, is that you need to look at the relationships the student has, and are you initiating or repairing the relationship? Is it somebody that they don't have a relationship with? Are you repairing a relationship? Because those are 2 different things. And sometimes that takes a lot of work, but overall it's a benefit. And I noticed with one of my 3rd grade clients that really, when I worked with his teacher on how to support him, and again changing the system that he was in, it had massive impact on how I worked with him individually and the success he had in the classroom. Because it was just a mental, and actually when he was in the 5th grade, you know, I knew his teacher personally, and he's like, I don't know how you worked with him, like, because those behaviors, and I was like, you got to work on the relationship with him first, because if you don't have a relationship with him, he won't listen to you. He doesn't care. There's no positive reinforcement that you can give him that will work for more than a day. I was like, he may be good for a day with candy, maybe, and it. But I was like, 1, that's bribery, so it's going to eventually fail. It's not really positive reinforcement. And 2, he's craving relationship. And I was like, especially because this friend of mine is a male teacher, and this client had lost his dad 3 years ago. I was like, his seeking male attention is also very strong. So you as a male teacher probably have more of an influence than a female teacher would have as well. So really work on your relationship with him, and how can you incorporate him? Can you make him a helper? Can you give him jobs? Because he's trying to impress you, and he's acting out in your class because he wants your attention. He wants you to talk to him. Even if you're talking to him because you're getting on to him about being inappropriate in class. And so also with the emotional development, looking at the physical development with girls, it's no surprise that middle school, a lot of changes happen. Boys like slightly behind in their development. Their changes happen around 13, whereas girls it's around 12. Puberty is a great source of stress for both for both genders. And so taking into account, middle school is a roller coaster, no matter which way you come from it. That you do have to take into these account, and even hormones just raging. Friday's a full moon, and teachers will tell you that has a big impact on it. But I do think they're just cycles and waves, that people are like, what happened on Thursday? And I was like, I think everyone's hormones just shot up at the same time, and that's what we got, you know. And so kind of taking that into account, that there is a fluctuation, especially in middle school. Here are kind of like some different ways to work with early elementary, intermediate grades, and adolescents. She brought up doing games, and like how some people are like, oh, they're having fun with you. And I've gotten that comment before. When we get to the play therapy and the group counseling classes, I'm actually going to bring in some of the interventions I've used with kids in group settings and classroom settings. But I'm a big fan of games, and people say like, oh, they just want to come in your office to have fun. And I was like, we do games for a purpose. I was like, yeah, they said they came to my office and they played Jenga. for 20 minutes. They came to my office and they played feelings Jenga, and we discussed feelings as we were playing it. And so I was like, I've changed all my games to be therapeutic in content, one. Two, I often find that kids, especially with the traumatic history, have a really hard time opening up to questioning. That, like, when you're questioning or just trying to talk and gather information, it kind of comes off as like an interrogation. Maybe at home they've been told not to talk to people outside the home about what's going on at home. And so there's kind of this wall and this buffer with some kids that they're not going to talk to you. And a lot of times those games, even just talking about feelings of like what makes you happy, what makes you sad, because it's the game that asks the question instead of me asking the question, it kind of removes that, oh, she's not, really trying to get into my business. The game asked me the question. And so it really spurs a lot of discussions, especially kids with the traumatic histories, to get them to open up, to get them to talk. It's also a way that I can create a controlled situation to see how a child responds to certain situations. And this works for children and it works with adolescents. Can they handle losing? If they start to lose, are they going to start to cheat? Do they have the expectation from adults that adults will give in and like lose on purpose so that they can win? And that's how I always start with my kids. I was like, I'm very competitive and I will not let you win. And like that kind of throws there, like, you're not going to let me win? No, actually I'm not. I'm very competitive and I've played enough Jenga that I'm really good at Jenga. So let's work with that. So I love games for that because I can create the control environment. I've had kids flip a desk and I was like, okay, you can't handle this game. I don't bring it back. And they're like, well, you won't bring it back? No, you flipped my desk the last time I brought this out. And so we have a discussion about like also after the fact of consequences sometimes for your actions and how you can move forward. So I like games and I always explain it to teachers and to parents when they're like, oh, you have a lot of games in your room. Yep, I do. I also like using a lot of stories. I feel like stories to tell a lesson and teach a lesson. For younger kids, I love Pete the Cat because he's a real chill cat. No matter what problem, he just keeps on walking and singing a song and it's all good. But I also like, there's a series of books called the Pigeon books, and like Don't Let the Pigeon Drive the Bus is one of the ones I own, or Don't Let the Pigeon Stay Up Late. And the pigeon does not have any coping skills, and he has huge temper tantrums in every single book. And when I talk to them, I'm like, do you ever feel like the pigeon? Nah. And I get that a lot. Like, they'll be like, no, I never act like that. And I talk with them about it, and I was like, I feel like I've seen you roll your eyes like the pigeon's doing right here. Oh, yeah, I do that. And we talk about, like, how the pigeon's response is not the best. And so I always like to give, like, good character examples, but also I tell stories of where the character failed. The hero of the story failed and maybe made a bad choice. And how did they overcome it? What ended up happening when they made the right choice? Because I think it's important for kids to see the same things. With the older grades, you can discuss, you go up with it. And there are stories that you can use with that as well. They like the games, more of an abstract thinking about it. I had a group of 5th graders